Kia ora, whakalofalahi atu, halo augeta, iorana, kamna Māori, nisambuli wenaka, talofa lava, aloha, warm Pacific greetings. Welcome to the Pacific Research Learning module, Positionality, Relationality and Reflexivity. Before we move into the learning module, it's good to set an intent and create a welcoming and safe space for exploration and learning. I open this with a Papuan proverb, o whae e blend ne huhe e ia role. An open leaf will get more sunshine. The more open you are to yourself and the more generously you give to others, the more abundance flows back to you. Welcome to topic 3 on positionality, relationality and reflexivity. Through this topic, you'll be better able to articulate the significance of positionality, relationality and reflexivity in Pacific research, supervision and teaching and learning, as well as reflect on your own positionality and relational connections to Pacific communities, places and knowledge systems, and consider how these influence your research, teaching and supervision practices. Through this topic, you'll have the opportunity to create an identity mosaic and apply the positionality guide to your specific research context. We've also provided various resources to deepen your understanding of the topics. To begin, let's define positionality. A good question to ask is, who am I in this place? This requires the researcher to actively reflect on their own position while also learning and engaging deeper with the place and people where the research is being conducted to understand the intersections. Positionality refers to the way in which researchers' identity, background, and epistemic orientation and relationships influence their approach to and interpretation of research. It acknowledges that researchers, whether insiders or outsiders to the communities they engage with, bring their own experiences, perspectives, and biases to the research process. These personal factors shape how research questions are formulated, how data is collected, how participants are engaged, and how findings are analysed, presented, and preserved. We note that Pacific insider and non-Pacific outsider are too simplistic a starting point for both. Both are not homogeneous but diverse. It is through a reflective practice on positionality that one can better ensure that research is conducted ethically, respectfully, and in alignment with Pacific worldviews and values. Now, this practice helps to build authentic relationships, understand power dynamics, support cultural sensitivity and respect, and ensure accountability. We'll now take a moment for you to reflect on your positionality by completing an identity mosaic. On the Canvas page below, you'll find a fillable form. This mosaic is adapted from Arizona State University and includes 2 wheels, a social identity wheel that can be seen on this slide, and a personal identity wheel on the next slide. The wheel highlights various categories that inform our positionality. Take a moment to download the form and complete. Fill in your identity for each of the categories listed. In the inner circle, record the identities that are most important or salient to you. In the outer circle, record the identities that are less important or salient to you. As in the slide before, you can now reflect on the personal identity wheel. Now that you've completed the wheel, reflect on the following questions. Are there any categories you would add that are salient to research in Aotearoa and the Pacific region? Which aspects of your identity feel more or less meaningful to you and why? How does history shape the current context or power dynamics of your social identity? How might these identities impact your research, teaching and learning and supervision? We'll keep this identity mosaic on hand for further reflection later in the module. It is important that positionality is understood as a foundational starting point in Pacific research, not a one-time declaration. It needs to be carried through the entire research process, guiding the researcher's engagement, methods, and interpretation. While institutional approval of a researcher's stated positionality may offer legitimacy, it does not grant unrestricted authority or autonomy. In the Pacific context, declaring positionality is not a free pass. It is a commitment to accountability, relational ethics, and cultural responsiveness. Researchers are encouraged to remain critically reflective and responsive to the communities they work with, recognizing that positionality is indeed dynamic and needs to evolve alongside the research journey. As previously mentioned, Pacific peoples live a way of life that encompasses nurturing shared spaces or relational va with consistent acts of cultural respect. That is why it is critical to continually ask the questions, why you, why now, and why this topic? Linda Tuhiwai-Smith's seminal work, Decolonizing Methodologies, underlines that positionality entails responsibilities and accountability to Indigenous communities and the politics of knowledge production, not just disclosure of identity. Smith begins from the premise that research has historically been a tool of colonization. Researchers, often Western and non-Indigenous, position themselves as neutral knowers, while Indigenous peoples were positioned as the objects of study. This history makes positionality in research an ethical and political matter, not simply a methodological one. As such, researchers are asked to take a decolonizing positionality. For Smith, positionality is part of the broader project of decolonizing research methodologies. It is not only about situating the self, but about challenging Western supremacy and authority over knowledge. Researchers must critically examine how their position can perpetuate colonial structures, or how it can contribute to Indigenous self-determination. Positionality then becomes a practice of accountability. Smith stresses that researchers must acknowledge their own positioning, cultural background, institutional affiliations, power, privilege, and so forth. Positionality is not just about confessing who you are, it is about being accountable to Indigenous communities. It requires reflexivity, asking, who am I in this research? Who do I represent, and who benefits from this work? Positionality is therefore based on relationality and becomes a practice of upholding ongoing community obligations. In Indigenous and Pacific worldviews, positionality is understood as relational. Researchers are embedded in networks of kinship, land, and history. Positionality thus carries responsibilities to maintain relationships of respect, of reciprocity, and care. This aligns with the concepts like te oleva, nurturing or keeping those relationships safe within Pacific contexts. The practical implications of enacting practice of reflexive positionality in research requires building long-term relationships with communities, negotiating consent and participation ethically, ensuring outcomes benefit Indigenous peoples, and recognizing that positionality is dynamic. It shifts depending on the context, on relationships, and feedback from communities. For the next activity, we ask that you pause the video and read pages 11 to 14 of the Fasubalu and Reynolds 2019 Relational Positionality, A Learning Disposition, Shifting the Conversation reading. Note the guiding questions to support you in your review of the reading. How does the article define relational positionality? What did the authors mean by negotiating position? How can relationships serve as sites of learning? What role does power play in the research dynamic? What are the nuances of the categories of insider-outsider, or the way a researcher may or may not be seen to belong? Some key points from the reading are highlighted in the slide. Pacific research requires a relational positionality where researchers continually reflect on the context of the research and their positionality within that research. As noted, a fluid positionality stance allows the researcher to adapt to the research as it progresses to ensure respect, reciprocity, and accountability throughout. Carling, Erdel, and Azati, 2014, note in their article Beyond the Insider-Outsider Divide in Migration Research, 3 intersecting elements of relational positionality that include an infinite number of dynamic and interrelated social categories held by both researchers and those being researched. Then there is perceived notion of the research, who is funding the research and why. There is also the researcher's personal characteristics or disposition. They explain that disposition is important when evident during research if the researcher shows they know and understand aspects of the relevant community. The key is not to essentialize those categories, but work to understand superdiversity and intersectionality and how can they play out to support or hinder the research. Crosser, 2012, says that relational positionality can also consider how researchers' identities are shaped by multiple, mobile, and flexible relations, and how that makes a difference to the research process. The concept of fluid positionality, therefore, refers to the ability to acknowledge shifts and changes in the context and interpersonal relationships within the research process and to adjust accordingly to maintain the VAR. Relational positionality can further be understood through oceanic ideas, particularly the idea of te oleva, which is most keenly highlighted in Tongan and Samoan practice. We have mentioned the VAR in previous topics, the concept of the sacred living space between people, communities, and the environment. Te oleva is to become attuned to this space and to care for it, to nurture it. It requires seeing how relationships to people in place are deeply interconnected and require an ethic of care built on respect and reciprocity. The VAR is fluid and ever-changing, which is why Pacific research requires deep reflexive practice. This slide highlights some of the key scholarship on the VAR. Researchers' understanding of Pacific cultural values, experiences of migration, and relationships to their communities play a critical role in ensuring that the research process is culturally relevant, respectful, and aligned with aspirations of the communities being studied. This requires an acknowledgement of the dynamic and diverse identities of Pacific peoples, who may have different cultural practices, languages, and beliefs shaped by their migration and diasporic experiences and connections to their homelands. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, it is important that the research process is also situated within a te tiriti or waitangi context, recognising the distinct cultural and legal rights of Māori as tangata whenua, the indigenous people of Aotearoa, and the responsibilities outlined in te tiriti or waitangi. In this context, positionality within Pacific research is not only about understanding and respecting the Pacific community, but also engaging in meaningful relationships with Māori communities and considering how both these cultural worldviews intersect and interact in the research space. Māori and Pacific peoples can often be part of the same research projects based on equity. However, there exists a genealogical link that goes beyond equity framing, intended to address need or priority. The genealogical ties between Māori and other Pacific peoples are profound and enduring. Genetic research supports a shared ancestry among the Austronesian diaspora, from which all Pacific peoples originate. Now, this deep-rooted connection is further acknowledged by the Health Research Council of New Zealand, which described the relationships between Māori and Pacific peoples as an ancient whanaungatanga, a familial bond characterised by a tuakana-taina dynamic within Te Moananui Kiwa, the Pacific Ocean. The literal meaning of Moananui Kiwa is the Great Ocean of Kiwa. Kiwa is regarded as an ancestral guardian of the ocean. The term reflects Indigenous understandings of the Pacific as a living, interconnected space that connects land, peoples, genealogies, emphasising connection rather than separation. Te Aronoi, AUT's Te Tiriti framework, offers guidance on how to engage in meaningful relationships with Māori. You can also seek out Vision Mataranga Māori for further guidance. Many Pacific populations or geographic areas may experience research fatigue, whereby participants and their communities have been over-researched, impacting response rates and data quality. To work towards uplifting Pacific research practices, the Pacific Research Guidelines offer the following guide to be applied throughout the research process. This is built on the researcher having a firm understanding of self and the place where you live and are conducting research. Who are you in this place? Through the next few slides, we'll walk through questions that can help guide you on this reflexive journey. For this activity, download the Word document Pacific Research Guidelines Positionality Guide for Researchers and pull out your identity mosaic. Identify a research project course you're teaching or postgraduate student you're supervising who is engaging in Pacific research. You can then move through the next slides, pausing the video after the introduction to each section to reflect on the questions posed. To begin, review your own personal and cultural background. Your identity mosaic can help with this. Based on the research project, course, or supervision you selected, ask the questions listed on the slide and in the guide activity. Pause the video now and take some time to complete this section. These questions focus on motivations and influences. They ask you to reflect on the purpose and drivers of research. Pause the video now and take some time to complete this section. This section looks at responsibilities and ethics, asking what commitments you have to the research context and community and what ethical stance can be applied. Pause the video now and take some time to complete this section. Now we explore the challenges, what complexities and limitations exist in the research. Pause the video now and take some time to complete this section. This leads us to the impact and contributions of the study. What are the intended outcomes and how will you be accountable to those outcomes being beneficial? Pause the video now and take some time to complete this section. Now that you've completed the activity, there are a few final questions to consider. How might this exercise support you to achieve more positive outcomes in research, teaching and learning and supervision? How might this approach support the decolonisation of research and empower research participants alongside researchers? Where can you turn for support on your journey? What relationships can you build and cultivate? A reflexive practice never ends. For each research project, course we teach or student we supervise, we continue to look at relational practices that clarify our positionality. Why you, why now, and why this topic? We hope you found this module as a useful introduction to the Pacific Research Guidelines. Our next topic will focus on Pacific research design and help you to become familiar with AUT's Pacific research design process and identify and apply core principles to incorporate into your research design and research plans. We'd like to warmly acknowledge the contributors to this module. Dr. Jessica Wirtschel, our Learning Module Designer. We also acknowledge the AUT Moanador Governance Group, the Moanador Pacific Research Guidelines Working Group, led by Dr. Daisha Tonimopea and our ROs Claralyn and Waverley for their valuable contributions. Our thanks also to the creative designers, Cece and Kayani, who are both AUT alumni, for helping bring this module to life. You can reach out to me if you need any further support, and you can also access Pacific research resources through the Moanador website. Thank you so much for your engagement in these learning modules, and I wish you all the best with your journey through Pacific research.